If you've ever been confused about why you can burn fat during a workout but not actually lose body fat, or why low-carb diets promise to keep you fat adapted in fat-burning mode yet sometimes fail to deliver results, this episode is for you. Today we're uncovering the difference between fat oxidation and actual net fat loss that almost everyone misunderstands. You'll learn how the Randle Cycle affects your metabolism, why fasted cardio might not be the magic bullet you think it is, and what really determines whether you lose fat regardless of what fuel your body is burning in the moment. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, certified nutrition coach, and today we're looking at one of the most misunderstood concepts in fitness, and that is the difference between fat burning, or the technical term oxidation, and fat loss, which is literally losing fat from your body, generally by losing weight and holding on to muscle. This confusion is often led to questions that come up on a daily basis, especially when I write or do an episode about carbs or low-carb diets, where people say, well, I'm fat adapted, or I burn more fat because I'm low carb. And it's a complete misunderstanding of what's actually going on. And so people chase down ineffective diets, potentially restrictive diets that are miserable. They waste their workouts by not training the right way. And then they get frustrated. They can't figure out why they're not seeing results despite doing the things you're supposed to do to quote unquote burn fat. The reality is that fat burning and fat loss are two completely different physiological processes. It's unfortunate that they sound very similar, but if we can understand the distinction, it will help you improve your body composition because you'll be informed on, whether you're putting your energy in the right place. So by the end of the episode, my goal is to help understand why things like low-carb diets, fasted cardio, other popular quote-unquote fat-burning strategies might not be working as promised. They might have some misdirection in there, and what you should focus on instead if you really want the results. Before we dive in, I do have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a moment to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Each month, I'm randomly selecting one reviewer, and they're going to receive a free protein supplement of their choice. This is my way of saying thank you for supporting the show. And the reviews help other people discover this show, why people like it, and how it might help them to escape the sea of confusion, of misinformation that's out there. So again, go to Apple Podcasts, submit a 5-star review, do it on your iPhone or Apple device. And if you don't have that device or don't use an Apple Podcast, feel free to throw in a rating on Spotify, or just shoot me a message and say, hey, show's great. Thanks for doing it. And that'll make my day. All right, so let's get into the topic and start by defining what we're talking about. The confusion between fat oxidation and fat loss is honestly at the heart. It is at the root of so many popular strategies today that are misguided, oftentimes because of this very thing. So what is the difference? Fat oxidation, when we say fat burning, right? That is a metabolic process where your body breaks down fat molecules to produce energy. And that's what typically mean when they talk about burning fat during exercise or following a diet or in any situation, fasted training, etc. It's essentially the use of fat as fuel, which is great. We want to do that. We want to use our fat, especially if you're trying to lose it, which leads me to fat loss. See, fat loss actually is the reduction of stored body fat over time. And this is what most of us are actually trying to achieve when we say we want to lose fat. It's not that we want to just burn fat in a vacuum. We want to lose the net fat stored on our body. And we want to add more muscle. We want to lose fat, right? We want to look better, leaner, more fit. We want to be stronger, more healthy, more athletic, all of the things. So I think what most people miss is that these two processes, burning fat for fuel in the moment versus reducing stored body fat over time, don't always go hand in hand. In fact, oftentimes they don't go hand in hand. They are different independent things going on. You can oxidize plenty of fat during your workouts, but not lose body fat from your body. Conversely, you can be primarily burning carbohydrates during exercise, yet still lose significant amounts of body fat over time. And so this disconnect leads to confusion, especially around low-carb diets, keto, carnivore, fasted training, all sorts of strategies, fat-burning workouts that promise to maximize fat burning. So that's why I'm creating this episode. Now, let's take a look at the physiology first. I think that's a great place to start. And there's something called the Randle Cycle. Now, I heard about this a long time ago. I kind of forgot about it specifically by name until a YouTube commenter mentioned it. And they said, hey, if this is all true, if low-carb diets might not be beneficial for a lot of people, what about the Randle Cycle? Why isn't that the reason low-carb diets would be so beneficial? So the Randle Cycle, it's also known as the glucose fatty acid cycle. It was first described by Philip Randle in the 60s, 1963. And it describes the relationship between carbohydrate and fat metabolism in our bodies. And so essentially, it explains that when your body has both glucose and fatty acids available, right? Glucose from carbs, fatty acids from fats, available as fuel, they compete with each other. So when glucose levels are high, your body's going to preferentially burn glucose and suppress fat oxidation, right? So it's burning glucose because it's there instead of fat. When glucose levels are low, your body's going to shift to burning more fat. Now, before I move on, notice what this means. This means when someone says glucose is the body's preferred energy source, that is a true statement, meaning it will burn that if it's available first. Then it will burn fat. But of course, if you deprive yourself of carbohydrates, it has no choice but to burn fat. So let's continue. So this is kind of a reciprocal in a way, but it is a little bit asymmetric. Your body's designed to use whatever fuel's most readily available, but it's going to go for glucose first if it's available. That's why it's slightly asymmetric, but it's going to preserve whatever's in shorter supply effectively for when it might be needed later. And that's why the low carb advocates and the fasted cardio enthusiasts, where they come in, because they, on one hand, correctly note that high insulin levels from carbohydrate consumption suppresses fat oxidation. But then they conclude that to lose body fat, you should minimize carbohydrate intake to stay in that fat burning mode as much as possible. But here's the flaw. Very important. What matters for fat loss isn't the fuel you're burning at the moment, but your overall energy balance over time. That's the key distinction here. So guess what's happening on a low-carb diet? You're eating more fats. In other words, you are taking in the same amount of energy. You're just burning a different type of energy because you have more of it. That's all you're doing, right? Whereas a person with moderate to high carbs is eating less fat. So they're burning more carbs. It all nets out to the same thing in terms of energy balance. And the Randle Cycle simply addresses the fuel selection. You have a fuel selection dial. Am I going to burn glucose or am I going to burn fat? It's not the chronic change in your fat mass on your body. So if I give you a concrete example, let's say you're eating a low-carb, high-fat diet, right? Keto, carnivore, we know them. Your insulin levels are going to be relatively low, and you'll be primarily oxidizing fat for fuel throughout the day. And if you're on keto, you might be to the point of past ketosis, where you are what people call fat adapted, where that's always what you're doing. So that's great. You're burning fat, right? But if your total calorie intake exceeds your expenditure, you're still going to gain body fat, even though you're primarily using fat as fuel, because the dietary fat you consume but don't immediately burn is going to get stored. So you're just eating more fat, and all that extra fat is now going to get stored. Whereas with the other guy who's eating a balanced diet, the extra carbs are going to get stored, or the fat's going to get stored while you burn the carbs. It doesn't matter. The energy nets out, right? So again, conversely, if you eat a higher carb diet, but you maintain a calorie deficit, right? So this is a lot of the people I work with who want a more flexible diet, more balanced, where they can enjoy their carbs. But then we put them into a calorie deficit. Well, guess what? You're still going to burn glucose primarily during and after meals because of the carbs, which suppresses your fat oxidation. But over a 24-hour period, your body's still going to need to tap into those fat stores once it runs out of glucose to meet its energy needs, resulting in net fat loss, right? Just because you don't have enough energy, period, total energy coming in. And that happens even though you're not maximizing fat burning, right? Fat oxidation at every moment. And this distinction becomes important when we look at how this applies to specific strategies. Let's start with low-carb diets. I know I've already hammered it a little bit, but I want to go one level deep, and then I want to talk about fasted cardio. So there's absolutely no question that reducing carb intake shifts your metabolism toward greater fat oxidation. We know that. I'm not going to dispute that. That's a fact. Studies consistently show higher rates of fat oxidation both at rest and during exercise in people following low-carb diets. And that is what the Randle cycle would predict. But it does not translate to better fat loss outcomes, because when calories and protein are controlled, the answer is an emphatic no. There is no difference. A meta-analysis by Hall and Guo in 2017 found that low-fat diets actually produced slightly more fat loss than low-carb diets when calories were equated. Now, part of the reason for that could be because guess what? Your body requires more energy to digest carbs than it does fat. Just like it requires more energy to digest protein than carbs or fat. So that could be one of the reasons why. There's probably other reasons behind there we're not going to get into today, like anti-catabolism, supporting your training, etc. Similarly, and also your stress and metabolism. Okay, enough of that. But similarly, there was a study. It was a highly controlled metabolic ward study. Everybody locked in one place and fed a controlled diet. This is by Hall in 2015. Found that a low-fat diet led to slightly more body fat loss than a low-carb diet, despite the low-carb diet showing increased fat oxidation. Now, my point isn't to say that low-fat's better than low-carb. It's to say that there's no advantage to low-carb when it comes to fat oxidation and fat loss, right? Yes, you have more fat oxidation, but you're not going to lose any more fat. Now, it doesn't mean low-carb diets can't be effective for fat loss either. That's what I want to say. They can be, but not because they maximize fat oxidation. They work for most people because, number one, you're going to increase your protein intake, which is something everybody needs to do to preserve muscle mass. Number two, it can improve appetite control in some people. Some people actually get hungrier on higher carbs. So having the higher fats and protein helps with satiety. Totally true phenomenon that happens. Number three, you reduce water retention. And this is just the appearance of much more rapid progress early on. So when somebody says, I went on keto and I lost 10 pounds. Yeah, most of that's water weight. And then number four, it makes your diet, I'll say, simpler in terms of food choices, which will have the illusion of making it easier to adhere and actually does so for some people. But for most people, it actually makes it harder long-term because you're avoiding things that you might otherwise want to enjoy. But again, there are exceptions. There are some people who are like, yeah, I'm happy as a clam on my very limited set of food choices. That's fine, okay? The point here is the effectiveness of a low-carb diet for fat loss doesn't have to do anything at all with increased fat oxidation and has everything to do with energy balance. Always comes back to that. And the same principle applies then to fasted cardio. I want to talk about fasted cardio. This is an interesting one because it is true that exercising in a fasted state, especially first thing in the morning before breakfast, results in higher fat oxidation during the workout. And if you have not recently consumed carbs to raise insulin, your body relies even more heavily on fat. So if you never eat carbs, of course, you're fat adapted. It's just going to be burning a ton of fat. But this, again, acute increase, right? This energy selection process toward fat burning doesn't translate to greater fat loss over time for all the reasons we've already discussed. But I'll just throw another study at you by Schoenfeld, a guy I very much respect in the space. This was from 2014. Found no difference in fat loss between women performing fasted cardio versus fed cardio when total calorie intake was controlled. So what matters is total energy deficit if you're going for fat loss, and not whether that deficit comes from fat or carbohydrate oxidation. Right? Now, that's not to say fasted cardio has no benefits at all. Again, I love nuance and individualizing here. The first thing that comes to mind is it's more time efficient for some people. You get up in the morning and you go, right? The other thing is it might improve your ability to switch between fuel sources. And this is an interesting one. Whether that's beneficial in any other way is, I think, still up for debate. But it does potentially do that. It might help you feel better if you don't like exercising, with food in the morning, or you don't have time to eat food. There's lots of logistical and preference reasons for this. And then it might have benefits for certain populations with certain metabolic disorders. I never disclaim that that's a possibility. But if you're just trying to lose fat, you have to focus on creating a sustainable energy deficit. And our last episode was all about that. It was all about fat loss. So go listen to that if you missed it. And this happens through your new training. This is the combination of nutrition and training called new training. Through your nutrition and training approach, your lifestyle, is going to be way more impactful than worrying about whether you're maximizing fat oxidation. And by way more, I mean like all of it. In other words, extra fat oxidation from low carb or fasted training, whatever, is going to make not a lick of difference in your overall fat loss relative to what the other lifestyle changes will. So if acute fat burning, fat oxidation is not the key to fat loss, what is? Well, again, it comes down to basic thermodynamics and energy balance. To lose body fat, you have to create an energy deficit where you consume fewer calories than you expend. That is it. And that forces your body to mobilize whatever energy is stored and available, right? Preferentially from fat tissue to meet its needs. And again, if you don't have enough calories coming in and you're still consuming carbs, it's going to go to carbs and then it's going to go to fat, but the net effect is the same, right? So the key factors here are then the total calorie intake versus your expenditure, your protein intake, resistance training, and the ability to adhere to your diet. Of course, recovery is massive as well. All the things I spoke about in the last episode, the 3+3 model of fat loss. So listen to that for a deep dive. And none of these things depend on maximizing fat oxidation at any given moment. That is just energy systems. That is just your body saying, hey, I'm efficient. You need energy. I need to give you energy. Let's see what's on the menu today. Is it glucose or is it fat? Doesn't matter. It's all energy to your body, right? And at the end of the day, the deficit is and the energy balance is what matters. Which brings me to an important engineering principle that applies perfectly here. Optimize for the outcome, not the process. Now, you might be confused when I say this because I talk all the time about how important the process is. But if we think of engineering where we focus on the end result, the product, the system, the service, the software, we then reverse engineer and work backward to determine the most efficient way to achieve it. We don't get caught up in optimizing, I'll say, individual steps if they don't materially affect the final outcome. We care about an efficient process that gets us to the outcome, right? And then we focus on the process, but we optimize for the outcome. And for fat loss, this means focusing on the factors that directly influence body composition over time, not on momentary metabolic processes that have little impact on the end result. Like, I'm not going to tell you to drink more coffee because it might have a slight thermic boost in your metabolism. That's not an efficient way to optimize the process. Think of it like this. If you're trying to save money, what matters is the difference between your income and your spending, right? Not whether you pay for a purchase with cash or credit. That's effectively what this is. Glucose or fat, cash or credit, doesn't matter. It's all coming from your energy budget. So with fat loss, what matters is the difference between your intake and expenditure, not whether you're burning fat versus carbs at a given moment. And now I want to address one more aspect of this topic that causes a lot of confusion, and that is the difference between what we measure and what matters. And this goes back to what I just said about optimizing for the outcome. When people follow low-carb diets or they do fasted cardio or any of these fat-burning tricks, they often point to indicators of increased fat oxidation as proof that they're working. They might mention ketones. Look at all the ketones in my urine or blood work. They might mention a lower respiratory quotient, RQ, during exercise. Oh, I'm burning more fat because my RQ is lower. They might say that they are fat adapted. Oh, I feel great. I have steady energy. I don't have crashes. All my inflammation has gone away. You guys seen these posts by people? I went on carnivore and everything got solved. Well, these measurements do indeed confirm something. They confirm increased fat oxidation. They might even confirm that you have eliminated something that didn't work for you, and then you just never added back the things that do. That's fine. That's cool. You start where you're at. But they don't predict better fat loss outcomes. They're measuring individual, independent aspects of the process rather than the result. And once you see that they don't actually produce fat loss and you reverse engineer it, you say, you know what? Maybe it's not necessary to focus on fat oxidation. In the end, what I actually focus on is measuring and tracking progress toward the end goal by optimizing the process for that. You know, my change in body composition over time, your trend weight, your measurements, your photos, your maybe even body fat. I'm not a big fan of measuring body fat, but there are ways to do body fat trends that are helpful. Has your strength gone up or down? How are your energy levels, your hunger, your well-being? And yeah, these are outcomes. And by outcome, I don't just mean at the end of the day, did you lose 20 pounds 6 months from now? I mean, all the things that come from your day-to-day actions in optimizing the process. You know, are you adherent to your calorie and protein targets? That is an outcome of the process of being consistent in hitting your targets. So anyway, I can go on, but I think it's important to understand that difference. Fat burning, fat loss, two different things. And this gives you more freedom once you understand that with your nutrition, with your training, or with your new training. Just kidding. And that's what matters, right? What matters is your energy deficit. It makes it simple. It actually makes it really simple. And I'm kind of hitting again on some of the messages from the last episode, which again, I highly recommend listening if you didn't. But when you know that what matters is the energy deficit, it actually frees you in a lot of ways. It frees you with your meal timing. You could eat when your schedule and preferences match. You can include carbs. I mean, that's the big one that comes to mind. If you enjoy them, if they fuel your training, if you tolerate them, absolutely. It informs your training. You're not going to be choosing movement or training for fat burning. You're going to do something that supports your real goal, which is strength, muscle, athleticism, whatever. And then you can find a diet that works for you, not based on some metabolic theory that doesn't actually produce the results. It doesn't optimize for the result. And that's much more enjoyable in my opinion. And they're going to produce better results because you're going to sustain them. That's what we're going for, right? The most optimal diet for fat loss is that one that you can stick with. I can say that to the cows come home. Some people won't accept it. They want to cut their foods. They want to claim that fat adapted makes them superior in some way for fat burning, and it doesn't, right? Energy balance is where it's at. All the other things are important for other reasons, for health, for strength, etc. But today we wanted to talk about the difference between fat loss and fat burning, right? So to recap, fat oxidation, burning fat for fuel, and fat loss, which is reducing stored body fat, are distinct physiological processes that don't necessarily go hand in hand. The Randle Cycle, look it up if you'd like, explains why carb intake suppresses fat oxidation, but it doesn't prevent fat loss because it's the energy balance that matters. Low-carb diets, fasted cardio, they do increase fat oxidation, but they don't produce any more fat loss. And some studies show they actually produce less. For successful fat loss, you're going to focus on the factors that influence body composition over time. That's what's important for fat loss. Go listen to my last episode, the 3+3 model of fat loss, for details. And then adapting an engineering mindset like we do here means optimizing for the outcomes over days, weeks, and months rather than optimizing for the process itself. The bottom line is that I don't want you to get caught up in chasing fat burning, because what's going to happen is you're going to do restrictive, weird, cult-like approaches. I'm sorry to put it that way, but you are. You're going to fall into a tribe that's all about fat burning, and you're actually not going to lose fat. And I want you to lose fat, right? I want you to lose fat doing something that works for you, that feels great, that's good for your body, your preferences, your lifestyle. That's it. All right. If you found today's episode helpful, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and be entered for a random selection of one winner each month to receive a free protein supplement of their choice. And it means a lot to me when people let me know what they think of the show. And it means a lot to others when they understand what they're getting into, for better or worse. Just go to Apple Podcasts on your Apple device, search for Wits and Weights, click ratings and reviews, and leave your feedback. It takes about 1 minute, but it makes a huge difference, so I really appreciate it. Until next time, keep using your wits, lifting those weights. And remember, when it comes to fat loss, it is not about burning fat in the moment. It's about creating the conditions for your body to lose fat over time. This is Philip Pape, and you've been listening to Wits and Weights. I will talk to you next time.